Now to another big story of the day. False allegations, venom, mendacity. Just a few of the words contained in a strong statement issued today by former journalist Frank Connolly, who's now Executive Director of the Centre for Public Inquiry, which is chaired by the former High Court Judge Mr Justice Fergus Flood. Mr Connolly was reacting to the contents of a Dáil written reply issued by the Minister for Justice Michael McDowell yesterday, saying that he was one of 3 men who travelled into the FARC-controlled area of Colombia in 2001 while in possession of a false passport. The Minister said the Gardaí were fully satisfied about the accuracy of the identification of the men. 3 months later, Mr Connolly's brother Niall Connolly was one of 3 men arrested by the authorities in that country before going on to be known as one of the so-called Colombia 3. In the past hour, I asked Frank Connolly if he thought there was something of a witch hunt going on.
These allegations have been floating around since 2002. I have vigorously denied them on every occasion. I've been asked about them. But what is noticeable is that they've really taken steam since the Centre for Public Inquiry was announced in February last. It's descended to a more vicious level. I think that could be said fairly.
Well, just in regard to what Michael McDowell said in his Dáil reply, just to take it step by step, I mean, have you visited Colombia?
No.
Ever?
No.
And then, so you're saying the question of you being in Colombia in possession of a false passport is irrelevant?
Is false.
And then, I mean, again, it's said by Michael McDowell that the Colombian authorities had established that on the 10th of April 2001, 3 people in possession of false Irish passports had earlier entered the FARC-controlled region in Colombia. The 3 persons who entered were subsequently identified as Frank Connolly, Niall Connolly and Pádraig Wilson.
Yeah, well, I wasn't one of them.
And he also said that the Garda authorities have informed him they are fully satisfied as to the accuracy of the identification of all the members of both parties.
Well, what I would say about this is that Mr McDowell is the Minister for Justice. His job is to administer justice in the country. There is something called due process, which means that the Gardaí investigate an allegation, and they did question me about this in 2002. It is then up to the Director of Public Prosecutions, if the Garda forward a file to them, to decide what to do about that. That is the process that I understand any citizen is entitled to. It is not the Minister's job to interfere in that process and to decide for himself who is guilty of what particular allegation or not. And I actually I've said it in the statement I released this morning, that I believe Mr McDowell has abused his position as a minister. And he's abused it in another way, in that he's called in the funders, a member of the board of Atlantic Philanthropies, and apparently showed him these confidential Garda files. Now, when was the last minister for justice that we know of that actually showed confidential files to a third party?
On that point, a spokesperson for the minister says there was no question of disclosing confidential information. What they say happened was that he had a private meeting with Chuck Feeney of Atlantic Philanthropies this summer, and that during the course of that meeting the minister, quote, told the clear, unvarnished truth about Frank Connolly.
The minister disclosed details that are a part of what is supposed to be an ongoing Garda inquiry in relation to me. And furthermore, the same information that he disclosed found its way onto the pages of the Irish Independent a couple of weeks ago, with pictures and illustrations of documents that are part of a Garda file. Now, I'd like to know how they found their way onto the pages of an article penned by a friend and drinking buddy of the minister. That's what I think is serious abuse of office.
Well, maybe something by way of an inquiry should be set up to investigate that thing. But coming back to what the minister said yesterday in his Dáil reply, he said, an Irish passport bearing the photograph of Frank Connolly had been issued in the name of John Francis Johnston on the 1st of November 2000. Do you know anything about that?
Absolutely not.
I mean, when you were being questioned by Gardaí in relation to all of this, I mean, did they show you any documentation or picture purporting to be your picture?
Of course they showed me documentation, and what I have said from that time onwards, and this is 3.5 years ago, is that it had nothing to do with me.
Did they show you a picture that was a picture of you?
Well, I'm not going to discuss firstly what happened in my discussions with the Gardaí, but I think you could fairly make that assumption, yes. And what I'm saying is that I have disputed and denied that I had anything to do with this alleged false passport.
Was it your picture
that I saw that was shown to me? Absolutely not.
So the picture that they say was a picture of you, you didn't recognise as bearing the image of your
As I said, you're now acting as if you're a Garda investigator yourself.
I'm not actually. I'm a journalist. I'm sure you understand
I had dealings with the Garda Those dealings are now the subject of a file which apparently has gone to the DPP.
No.
And that's all firstly, it's not up to me to prove any allegations or to disprove any allegations against me. It's up to due process.
No, but I'm simply trying to draw you out on what happened.
I know what you're doing.
And I think there are perfectly reasonable questions that our audience would like to have answered.
Well, let me put a simple answer. No, I was not in Colombia. Secondly, I did not travel on a false passport. Okay,
now the question that you seem to want to avoid is this. When you met the Gardaí and they showed you this documentation, you say they showed you a picture. And do I correctly understand you to say that you didn't recognise yourself in that picture?
In simple terms, that was not me. Can I be any clearer than that?
Was there a resemblance?
Can I be any clearer than that?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
that's the reality.
Right, but I mean...
And I have said this time and time again, and I'm also saying now, and I hope that this is used because this is an edited interview, I'm also saying now that this campaign of vilification has intensified since the Centre for Public Inquiry was set up. We put out two very well-received reports and very professionally produced reports, most recently one on the Corrib gas controversy. That obviously has upset a lot of people, and quite clearly the idea of having an independent watchdog upsets some people, Mr. McDowell in particular. He has no right to interfere with my employment. He has no right to disclose information that is supposedly confidential to people who are funding our organisation.
Right. Now, I mean, I don't want to be unfair about this, but, I mean, I suppose, and it's unfair to ask people to prove a negative in one sense, but
Absolutely.
At the time they say that you were in Colombia, are you in a position to show otherwise?
When the Director of Public Prosecutions, if he ever does, decides to form a case against me, I will deal with all of the issues, absolutely fully. I have no problem in saying that. I am not going to be interviewed or interrogated as if I was in a Garda station on an RTE programme.
Well, I take that as a compliment in one sense, but I mean, really, we're talking about...
It's intended as a statement of fact. I do not intend to go into whatever may arise from this so-called 3.5-year inquiry by the Director of Public Prosecutions in the Gardaí. And I don't think the Minister is entitled. I don't think the Minister is entitled.
If the Director of Public Prosecutions were to mount a case or agree to a case going ahead, maybe they would need possession of the passport. That might be a particular difficulty.
I have no intention of commenting on that, and I will deal with that. When that issue arises and somebody decides to prosecute, I have no problem.
Okay, but I mean, in simple terms, this could be very easily explained. If you can say to me, look, I was covering court cases down in the High Court on the 10th of April in 2001.
Sean, I will deal with that in my own time.
But you
hardly expect me now to preempt potential criminal proceedings.
I'm not asking you.
That's exactly what you're asking for.
I'm simply saying, can you show that you were somewhere else when they say you were in Colombia?
I will deal with anything that is thrown at me if it emerges through proper due process, and that means the DPP deciding to do something. It's 3.5 years into this, and that's all I'm going on.
Right, and I mean, you to go back to something you said earlier, clearly believe that there's a direct connection between the publication of reports by the Centre for Public Inquiry and, well, these leaks or statements, Dáil replies and so forth. But I mean, isn't it understandable in one sense that if the government have these beliefs based on what they regard as very solid Garda information, that they would say, who is this guy to be lecturing us about public standards?
Mr. McDowell has these beliefs, from what I can understand. Mr. McDowell, there was a report in the Sunday Independent newspaper several weeks ago where they claimed that Bertie Ahern had interfered with the Board of Atlantic in relation to me. That report turned out to be absolutely untrue. It now emerges several weeks later that it was Michael McDowell who discussed these matters with a member of the Board of Atlantic Philanthropies. The question is, where did the notion come that it was Mr. Ahern, the Taoiseach? I believe a lot of this comes directly from Mr. McDowell, and not only that, but the people he's close to within journalism managed to get hands on confidential documents that he was waving around some weeks earlier.
Well, just coming back as well to the impact of this, you say that there's venom and mendacity, false and malicious statements, an effort to destroy your reputation. Have they succeeded?
I don't believe they have, and I don't believe they will succeed, because I have a track record, as you know, in journalism, going back a long time. I've done a few things which have, I think, helped to improve public standards in the country. I have no intention of blowing my own trumpet, but I think that reputation will endure, no matter what is thrown at me by the Minister or anybody else.
There are two people who have a close interest in the work you're doing at the present time. One of them is Mr. Justice Fergus Flood. Has he questioned you about any of this?
Mr. Justice Fergus Flood and the rest of the board of the Centre for Public Inquiry have given me 100% support at every time these matters have arisen, and they usually arise because of inaccurate reports in newspapers.
So has he asked you to explain all of this?
I have discussed this in detail with Mr. Justice Fergus. And one of the things that he will say and has said, and he's quoted in today's paper as stating, is that every citizen is entitled to due process.
What about Chuck Feeney?
That he's entitled to be seen as innocent until proven otherwise. Mr. Feeney, obviously I've discussed this, but I don't go into it in public, our discussions with our funding agency.